Okay.
All right.
Hey guys, we're here for our next session. It's a ZeroX workshop. We have Amir, the CTO of ZeroX, and Daniel, an engineer at ZeroX. They'll be doing a talk on consuming liquidity in decentralized applications with the ZeroX API. Like usual, can you confirm in the ask a question section that you can hear them, and can you guys speak?
Hello, my name is Daniel.
My name is Amir.
Can you guys hear them?
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
All right, just hang on for a second. Someone
Chat is working again.
Is it if
people are
if
saying
they don't
yes
speak,
in the
does that
chat?
mean it's a yes or?
Everyone's saying yes in the chat.
Oh wow. Okay.
All right. Can we go ahead and get started? All right.
Oh wait. Sinju just disconnected, so I think we can just
perfect.
go ahead.
All right. Sorry about that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Today, I'm going to be giving a high-level overview of ZeroX API and why you should be using it today. Then I'll pass it off to Daniel to give a workshop on how to actually use it. And then finally, we will be demoing a new product release from ZeroX. So before we get started, just want to say that if anyone has any questions throughout, please use the Ask the Question feature at the bottom of the screen. Or I guess you could drop them in the chat. Seems to be working again. Also want to give a big thank you to Shinju for organizing this conference. Just lots of super high quality speakers throughout all different time zones. It was, yeah, really a big effort on her end. All right, and with that, let us get started. So yeah, as I mentioned today, I'm going to be giving a talk on consuming liquidity with ZeroX API. So first of all, I want to frame the problem a bit. Blockchains are really, really good for marketplaces. Almost every single decentralized application I've seen can be boiled down to a marketplace in some form. We have some provider of a service, we have consumers of that service, and then typically using the blockchain kind of as a middleman to facilitate some sort of transactions between the consumers and the providers. When you think about DeFi, this is even more true. Lending protocols, they have lenders and borrowers, trading protocols and makers and takers. Today we're going to be focusing more so on the exchange aspect. So because ZeroX is a protocol for decentralized exchange. So when you're building a decentralized application, I would say most people immediately jump to focusing on distribution or kind of the demand side of the equation of the marketplace. But really, you need to be thinking about both things, because both the supply and the demand sides of the marketplace kind of perpetuate each other and improve each other so that you can build a lot of value and have a successful application. So for exchange specifically, more traders will create more opportunity for liquidity providers, which will then be able to provide better prices for more traders, and the cycle continues. Now, since I mentioned that, I would say most people start by thinking about demand, and liquidity is really something that happens behind the scenes. And I think it's very critical to actually bootstrapping liquidity for your application to be successful. So now if you're building a dApp, you have to make the decision, am I going to try to build this liquidity myself, or am I going to buy the liquidity or consume it from somewhere else? I would argue that it's a better decision generally to go for the buy here. It's very challenging to build liquidity, very time consuming and very expensive. And then there are companies like ours, which are almost exclusively focused on doing so. So now we've made the decision to buy the liquidity rather than to build it. Where do we go from here? So over the past couple of years, there has been an explosion in the decentralized exchange space and all sorts of different types of models. So we have ZeroX Mesh, which is a peer-to-peer network for sharing off-chain 0x orders. We have Kyber, which is an on-chain decentralized exchange. We have Uniswap, on-chain automated market maker. We have Oasis, which is an on-chain order book. We have Curve, which is a different kind of on-chain automated market maker, which specializes in stablecoins. So how do you decide which one of these to use for your application? The problem is that they are really they're different, and they're better for different use cases. So some might be better for smaller purchases or larger purchases. Some might be better for certain types of assets. Some may be better during periods of differing volatility. So if you're picking any single one of these, there's a good chance that you made the wrong decision at some point in the future, because maybe your application changes or the environment around your application changes. So how you solve for this? This is where 0x API comes in. 0x API plugs into all of these different liquidity sources and will make it so that you do not have to choose between them. You can just choose a single endpoint and be able to tap into all of these simultaneously. Most recently, there have actually been a few new liquidity sources added to the API. So there's now a request for quote system, which allows market makers to provide better prices directly to the consumers. And there's also a private liquidity pool that's shown really good prices for a few pairs. So I want to highlight a few features. First of all, I frame this as a buy versus build decision, but I do not mean buy literally. 0x API is completely free to use. It takes advantage of what we call smart order routing to actually route trades throughout all of the different liquidity sources at once. So it doesn't just pick a single one. It will break up your trade across all of them. And the smart order routing will also take into account any sorts of fees or gas costs in order to truly provide the best price available to the user. It consumes both on-chain and off-chain liquidity, which is different from a lot of other DEX aggregators that we've seen. And it's continuously being improved. So if you are plugging into the API, you are going to get the benefits of more liquidity sources, more liquidity providers, new liquidity models, improved smart order routing, without really having to do anything. You don't even necessarily need to update a dependency because you're still just using the same API endpoint. It's also open source and can be self-hosted. If you don't trust us, you don't want to rely on a hosted service, you can run this yourself and tap into the exact same liquidity. And then finally, this is consumable in both wallet type applications as well as smart contracts, actually, so that the API endpoints will return the exact call data you need that can be used directly within a smart contract if you wanted to do something more interesting. So some examples of that might include margin trading or arbitraging, or maybe you're liquidating some collateral and hedging that with some on-chain liquidity. You can do all of that just by tapping into the API. And with that, I will pass it off to Daniel.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Amir. So two questions first. First thing, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. And can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much, Amir. So my name is Daniel Pyrathon, and today we're going to learn how to integrate the 0x API in your own project. We're going to learn how to make a request to the swap to the quote endpoint, learn to understand the response from that quote endpoint, and then we're going to learn to settle that quote on chain by performing a Ethereum transaction. We will be building this swap functionality on this DEX UI on the left side that I built for the purpose of this tutorial. Just as a brief overview, I have my MetaMask account here, okay, where I have some test Ether. I have a balance of 0 DAI, and I have a balance of 1,000 USDC. And this exchange is actually extremely simple. It can only do two things. you can sell 100 USDC for DAI and sell 100 DAI for USDC. When I click these two buttons, the callback handler gets called this function here called perform swap async. Both these buttons are connected to the same swap handler. The difference is in the first two parameters, the buy token address and the sell token address. In fact, if I press this first argument here, the sell token address is going to be DAI's address, and the buy token address is going to be USDC's. And for this one here, it's vice versa. The amount to sell here is always 100, right? So we're selling 100 USDC or 100 DAI. And the from address here is simply the address of my MetaMask account that gets proxied down. I won't go into too much detail of what a Web3 provider is, but effectively a Web3 provider is a pretty standard pattern that exists in many Ethereum libraries. And it's the way in which you can read and write to the blockchain, to the Ethereum blockchain in your web application. So the goal of our tutorial is to implement this function here, this perform swap async, where we will effectively learn how to calculate how much we need to sell. And then we're going to make a request to the quote endpoint and look at the response. And then finally, we're going to settle that response on chain. And we're going to do this with like 10 to 15 lines of code. Before we go ahead, I just want to mention a couple of disclaimers. First thing is we are going to be running on the Kovan testnet. So we're not going to be using the Ethereum mainnet for speed purposes. But again, this is easily replicable on the mainnet. And because we are using the Kovan testnet, we won't be using the real DAI and the real USDC, but we will be using drop-in replacements for these ERC20 tokens. And then the second thing is we won't be covering, for purpose of time, a couple of very important, relevant concepts that are around every sort of DeFi application, which is token allowances. So if you want to trade using 0x or other other exchanges, you need to allow that exchange to withdraw funds on your behalf. So I won't go into too much detail there, but the good news is that if you download the workshop that we've created, and this will be tweeted by the 0x account after, the 0x Twitter account, you will actually be able to look at the code on how to set allowances. And you're also, because this is a mintable token, you can just press the button and mint your tokens to test out the demo for yourself. So without further ado, let's go ahead and implement the swapping functionality. So the first thing we want to do is we want to convert the sell amount from the number 100, which is sort of the unit amount, into base unit amount. Why is this important? Because in Ethereum, right, Ethereum doesn't, Solidity, I think, particular, doesn't can only handle whole numbers. So it's important for us to convert that whole number, convert that unit amount into a number that is interpretable by Solidity. And so I'm going to just create this variable. I'm just going to call it amount to sell in Ethereum. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this function that I've already created. Again, this function is fully documented, so you can take a look at it after. And there are 3 parameters here. So we're going to pass in the sell token address, again, because we're converting the sell amount, so we need the sell token address. We're going to pass in the amount to sell. And then the last argument is going to be the actual provider itself. Okay, so we're just going to, again, create this argument here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a request to the 0x API. So now that we've converted this argument, we can make a request to the quote endpoint. And so in order to understand what that actually is, let's just open the documentation a second. So again, the quote endpoint allows us to fetch a quote for a specific trade, right? So you specify the token that you want to buy and sell and the amount that you want to buy or sell, and it will return a quote. And what's cool about the quote response is that it actually contains a pre-generated Ethereum transaction inside. And you can take this Ethereum transaction and just pass it into your smart contract or pass it to your favorite Web3 client in order to sign and broadcast that transaction to settle the trade. There is no knowledge about 0x that you need at all. So again, you could specify, let's start by looking at these parameters here. You can specify or the symbol that you want to trade in case USDC, or you can specify the address. In this case, I'm going to specify the address. And then you can specify or the buy amount or the sell amount. I'm going to specify the sell amount here. And remember, because we have to pass in the base unit amount, we're not going to pass in the number 100, but we're going to pass in that big integer. And then there's a lot of interesting optional parameters that I like to pass in. But for now, I'm just going to pass one, which is called the taker address. Again, this is an optional parameter, but if you pass in the address of the address that is going to make this trade, that is going to fill this transaction, what happens is the 0x API actually simulates that trade internally and make sure that it's successful. It's also good for gas estimation. So it does all of that for you. So I'm just going to pass in my MetaMask address here. And so now we're just going to make a request to this URL, and we're going to use parameters, and we're just going to log the response. And I just want to make one preface here, which is, for the sake of time, we're not going to, if you were to implement this by yourself, you would also want to make sure that the user has enough balances and the user has enough allowances. In our case, I just want to be selling my USDC for DAI, 100 in this case, so I do have that balance, and I also do have my allowance of 300. Going to open my console here, and I hope the font should be big enough. So again, I'm going to now make a request to the 0x API. And as you can see, here is my response back. And you can actually see the price here and the guaranteed price, which takes account for things like slippage. And then if you're interested in looking at where that liquidity is coming from, you can actually look at the sources array. So you can see in this case, the liquidity comes 100% from 0x. Again, for most experienced Ethereum developers, you can see many fields here that are very common to you, like gas price, to and from. And this is because, again, a response from the 0x API will contain a Ethereum transaction that you can just get and submit on chain. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to pluck that. We're going to pluck that Ethereum transaction. And the cool thing about the 0x API is it also estimates correctly the amount of protocol fee that you need. So again, for the user, it's complete abstraction. So again, we've just extracted that transaction. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create our Web3 client. So this will be used to send transactions on behalf of our MetaMask address. And we're just going to send that transaction. Let's take a look. Again, as I save the code, it's going to reload. All right, so now let's make our sell. And if everything goes well, I'm supposed to receive a MetaMask transaction. As you can see here, the gas has already been set. The amount has been set. Everything has already been set for me. All I have to do is confirm. And if everything goes well, which it's going to because this is a live demo, yes, our swap was executed successfully. And with 10 lines of code, you are able to perform a swap of your favorite currencies, DAI for USDC. Let's just take a look at this transaction on chain. The great thing about the 0x API is that with 15 lines of code, you get a service that is always going to improve in pricing, right? As the 0x team aggregates more external liquidity, adds new sources of liquidity, you're always going to get the best pricing. And at no cost for you at all, because the 0x API performs all that abstraction for you. And here we are. We swapped 100 USDC for 100.8 DAI. And yeah, that swap was successful. That's really good. So again, I really hope that I managed to convince you on how easy it is to integrate the 0x API. But I'm going to pass it back to Amir now, which is actually going to show you what type of retail trading platform can be built on top of the 0x API as its foundation. So without further ado, Amir, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thanks, Daniel. Hopefully everyone could see it's super easy to make a trade using 0x API in just a couple lines of code. I'm going to be sharing my screen again. Cool. So I'm going to be demoing Matcha, which is a product that we just released in a closed beta, and Shinju just dropped a link in the chat. So please check it out if you get a chance later. We would love for everyone to sign up and love to get your feedback on this. So Matcha is a simple swap UI that is built entirely on 0x API. And it really has a focus on user experience. So I wanted to walk through two different flows for you today. I'll also say that I'm currently connected to a MetaMask wallet on mainnet. So any numbers you see right now will be, trades that you could actually be making. So first thing you'll notice here is a search bar up on top. So this is really meant to be like a search engine for tokens, so that you could really exchange any two tokens for each other. Then you'll notice these cards beneath for individual assets, and I'm going to go ahead and click Explore More, which brings up all the tokens that are available to trade on Matcha today. If I go ahead and click on one, you'll see some information about that asset. You'll see some simple charts, and then you'll see this trading card on the right, where it's super easy to compare prices across the most popular assets without really needing to type in or go to an individual page. So let's say I think DAI is expensive. Want to restore it to the peg. So I am going to sell some DAI for some USDC. I want to sell, say, 1 million DAI. Finding me the best price with 0x API. If I hover over this, you'll see that this is actually pulling from 4 different liquidity sources to get you the best price. And it's search 6 in total. And I can exchange my 1 million DAI for about 1,007,000 USDC. So still not restored to the peg, unfortunately, but we'll get there. All right, so the next flow I want to highlight is the search flow, which is fairly similar. So now let's say I want to trade some Ether. I can just, the search bar persists across pretty much the entire website. And it'll pull me right here. So I actually do have a little bit of Ether in my wallet today. Not going to actually make a trade since we're on mainnet here, but I do want to show you what the checkout flow kind of looks like. So I want to sell 0.1 Ether, and this ended up just going through one of the liquidity sources with the best price, which is 0x. And there we go. So that is pretty much it. There's also this accounts page. Not really much on here since I haven't actually made any trades. But yeah, as I mentioned, please check it out at matcha.xyz. We're taking signups right now and going to be letting a lot more people in over the next couple of weeks, and we would really love your feedback. And then I will end this with a few links to our API docs, our Discord, where we're constantly answering any technical questions. And then there's a link to our GitHub, the workshop that Daniel went through earlier today, and Matcha as well. And now, since the chat is working, I actually am going to just post a link to these slides so that you can get all the links as well.
Very cool. Thank you for that, Amir. We have some also some very interesting questions. that people have posted. So, so let's take a look. So how does the 0x API interact with all liquidity sources, Uniswap, Curve, 0x, all in one transaction? And what conventions are in place to keep gas prices low for such an interaction? Amir, do you want to go ahead, or should I?
Yeah, I can take that question. So it uses a new feature enabled by 0x v3, which kind of allows people to plug in what we call bridge contracts that can you can basically represent liquidity from any on-chain source in the form of a 0x order. So what 0x API does is it samples all of these different exchanges and pulls prices from all of them, and then it calculates the best path entirely off-chain. So this ends up saving on a lot of gas, because that's really where a lot of the complexity is. And then it'll create 0x orders and just kind of fill the 0x orders through our main system of smart contracts. So what keeps gas prices low? So one is the off-chain smart order routing, and then we actually also burn gas tokens through one of our bridge contracts. So for those of you not familiar, gas tokens will not reduce the gas price of the transaction, but they will reduce the total gas used by the transaction.
Very nice. How would one build liquidity? Is it a matter of trying to convince whales to provide?
Not necessarily whales, but there are professional market makers in this space. But everyone has an opportunity cost, and if you're building a brand new application, the liquidity providers probably will not just flock to it without some opportunity sizing there. So if it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, because initially your application is probably not going to have users because it's brand new and because there's no liquidity, and then because it has no users, liquidity providers will probably not want to make the effort to do that. So I think 0x API is a perfect way to bootstrap that.
All right, guys, we can probably take one last question, and then we need to transition into the next session.
All right, cool. So I guess there is this one question, which is so I think we've answered this question that Mohammed asked, which is, how does the 0x API maintain off-chain liquidity? Shall I go ahead?
Yeah.
Or
sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So we actually do not maintain off-chain liquidity, but what we have these things called DEX bridges, right? Where what we can do is we can actually tap in to off-chain liquidity from other exchanges. And so they're actually still represented as a 0x order, which you may know is off-chain. But when it actually goes filling on-chain, it actually goes through a other exchange. It goes through a decentralized exchange.
And just to elaborate on that a bit, it also does connect to 0x Mesh, which is, as I mentioned earlier, peer-to-peer network for off-chain 0x liquidity specifically. So if you were to run your own instance of 0x API, it would actually spin up a mesh node for you, and it's tapping into that. There's also, I mentioned a request for quote system built in, so that's another form of off-chain liquidity that we plug into.
Yeah. I just noticed now, I thought it was on-chain liquidity instead of off-chain liquidity. So thank you, Amir. Okay, well, I think we're up on time. I just want to mention, if any of you wants to build on top of the 0x API, please connect with us, with me directly over Twitter, whatever channel, LinkedIn, and I'd love to work with you to integrate 0x API in your own application. I'm very passionate about it. It's a great thing. It's in 10 lines of code. You can get this great functionality. So I want to share it with the world.
That's fantastic. Thank you guys so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. So we're going to transition into the next session now. If you guys can just give us a confirmation that you can hear us, we can just jump right into it. So just hop in the chat and put in a comment. Thanks so much and take care.